Hello, my name is Michael Colaswano, and this is my first project for Science and Technology of Ancient Greece and Rome online with Professor Connolly. So for my project, I decided to choose the triremes that were used by the ancient Greeks and Romans. So the trireme got its name from actually the ship itself having 3 rows of oars. The trireme itself actually developed from an earlier ancient warship called the Pentaconter, and then from that it turned into a bireme, which was composed of only 2 banks of oars. According to Thucydides, the trireme was first introduced to the Greeks by the Corinthians in about the late 18th century BC. The design of the trireme was actually quite complex, and its creators had to account for many factors when making one. The most important factor was often deciding how many oarsmen would be on the ship, because they mostly controlled how fast or slow the ship could move. If the ratio of oarsmen to the size of the boat was off, then the ship might not be able to move fast enough through the water, allowing for enemies to easily attack. Other factors taken into account when making these ships were the types of timber used in construction, weight, propulsion, and many more. As they were very fast, this meant the materials used to make them had to be very light and were subject to wear and tear. Certain parts of the ship, such as the ropes, sails, and rudders, required daily upkeep to remain functional. Oftentimes, the crew would go ashore with their ship to prevent it from getting waterlogged overnight. Being so light, it only required about 140 men or so to get these ships onto land. Now, in order to give a better understanding of the crew of a trireme, I included a short informational video to quantify the amount of crew members.
An average trireme had a 200-man crew. 7 officers, 170 oarsmen, 14 marines, called epibatai, 10 hoplites, and 4 archers, the toxotai, as well as 9 sailors who were responsible for the ship's sails and general maintenance. It has to be mentioned that these numbers vary according to the strategy of each commander and the level of professionalism of the particular city-state navy.
The length of the ship was around 40 meters long, allowing enough room for the nearly 200 crew members that most ships had. Materials used to make the ships were mainly comprised of 3 different types of timber. Fir, pine, and cedar were the main types of timber used to make these ships. Each type had its pros and cons, whether it be being more lightweight or more durable, but the choice of which one to use was usually based on the accessibility the shipbuilders had to each type of wood. The shipbuilders also carried a heavy burden on them, as if they chose the wrong type of timber, the ship itself could suffer catastrophic damage to itself and the crew. One of the first significant uses of the triremes by the Greeks came during the Persian Wars. Athens found itself in a conflict with the close-by island of Aegina, which boasted a strong navy. In order to stand a chance against them, Athens began the construction of around 200 triremes in response to the opposition's fleet. The first conflict to take place was at the Battle of Artemisium, in which both Greek and Persian forces suffered huge fatalities. However, the turning point of the war took place in Salamis, where the naval invasion of Xerxes was destroyed by the Athenians. Most of these ancient naval battles were comprised of 2 main tactics, ramming and boarding. The objective of ramming was to create a hole in the hull of the opposition ship with the goal of sinking them. Most ships contained a bronze ram attached to the front of it, which was used for ramming at high speeds. If the ramming failed, the next option was to attempt to board the enemy ship and fight in hand-to-hand combat. Once 2 ships were brushed alongside each other, the boarding process could begin. Now I'm going to include a brief video clip portraying one of the battles that would have gone on in ancient Greece with the triremes.
Now! Ah!
However, the onboard crew members were not the main offense of the ship. It was the ship's speed and ramming capabilities. But when battles between crews did take place, the main goal of the soldiers was to protect its ship's own oarsmen, preventing the enemy from making the ship immobile. Throughout the subsequent years, mainly in the Hellenistic period, the trireme developed into a more advanced type of warship. One of these warships was called the quinquereme. Unlike the trireme, the quinquereme was not named for the number of rower banks, but for the number of rowers per section. Because of this adjustment from the trireme, these ships were often much bigger and allowed for armor that could protect the ship from ramming attacks. Also, the added amount of rowers allowed for artillery to be fired from the ships. The Greeks could not afford these larger, more expensive ships, so they mostly stuck with the triremes. However, the Hellenistic kingdoms, such as ancient Rome, used the larger quinqueremes more frequently in combat. Using the sea as a means of transportation, trade, and combat has been a part of many cultures around the world for centuries. I will be highlighting some of the cultures that I believe have the most similar forms of ships to the triremes that portray its development from the past all the way up to present day. First off, I would like to start with the Vikings, as I think they use ships very similar to the Greek triremes. The Vikings had three main types of ships: the Nar, which were ships mostly used for Atlantic exploration, could hold up to 122 tons of cargo, which was beneficial for long journeys. Next, longships, which were mainly used for Scandinavian trade, exploration, and combat during the Viking Age, were the most common type of Viking ships. These specific ships were the most similar to the ancient Greek triremes, as they both included many rows of oars. The last type of Viking ship was known as the Carve, which was a smaller version of the traditional longship. These ships were used mostly for transporting people and livestock. Although the Vikings didn't necessarily use their ships for straight-up combat like the ancient Greeks did, now I'm including a short clip going into more detail on the Viking longship.
The ship is like the symbol of the Viking Age. They've been advancing this technology at times when other people had not bothered. It's amazing to me that nobody else had boats anything like them or anything like as efficient. The boats the Franks had were left behind from Charlemagne's age. They were like hulks, they were unmaneuverable. The Saxons had no way of protecting the coastline or rivers from Vikings.
All in all, I found the triremes, used primarily by the ancient Greeks, to be very interesting for many reasons. The fact that they used so many oarsmen was really astonishing to me, because they were able to reach really fast speeds. Also, I found the ramming aspect of the trireme to be quite fascinating as well. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my project. I thoroughly enjoyed working on it, and I'm always happy to add to my knowledge on the ancient Greeks and Romans. Thank you.